All right, so we are going to go over elements of fairy tales. So, a fairy tale is a magic story which cannot be true. A fairy tale often has a beginning phrase that shows us or indicates a distant past or a make believe land. So, this would include beginnings like once upon a time, or once there was, or long, long ago, etc. So, setting is where and when a story takes place. So, you can think about time as in 4 p.m. or time as in the Middle Ages, right? That could be the when and the where would be, maybe a field or California, right? That's the whens and wheres. It's just where and when the story takes place. But in fairy tales, they often take place in made up times and places. So, some examples would be an imaginary forest, a castle in the sky, a gingerbread house, and then the times could be, the distant past or the distant future that maybe never existed. Fairy tales have imaginary characters that are good, and fairy tales have imaginary characters that are bad. So, for example, on the left, we have the fairy godmother being an example of good, and on the right, we have the big bad wolf being an example of bad. Fairy tales often have royal characters such as queens, kings, princes, princesses, and sometimes a castle. Imaginary characters like dragons, fairies, elves, and giants are often in fairy tales. So characters often use personification. So that's when you give human qualities or human traits to something that's not human. And characters in fairy tales often have magical powers or magical things. Characters are sometimes filled with greed and use tricks to get what they want. Fairy tales may include magical events too. So think a wolf blows down a house made of sticks, or a gingerbread boy comes to life, or maybe a fairy godmother turns mice into horses, or a boy buys magic beans that grows into a giant beanstalk. Things often appear or happen in threes or sevens. So we've got the three little pigs, maybe the three wishes, right? Or the seven dwarves. Wishes are often granted in fairy tales. There's often a problem which leads to a solution which has a pleasing or happy outcome. A difficult problem, often very hard to solve, is solved by the end of the story. This is not always the case, though. Sometimes a lesson can be learned from the ending of the fairy tale. A fairy tale has a pleasing ending and often a happy ending phrase like, and they lived happily ever after. So think of the moral of the story, what that story teaches us. So, what fairy tales have you heard of or read? Think about them as you're going to be asked to read some versions of fairy tales and create your own version too.